Welcome back. I have decided officially that I would prefer to just be putting these videos out and trying to spread the knowledge as much as I can. I know that there hasn't been anything in a while, and that's because I was really trying to push the production quality in these videos, and every time I filmed something, I wasn't happy with it, and I scrapped it, and I kept throwing stuff away, and I decided that it's more important just to get the information out there. So, we are back, and welcome to Lightning Round. In this series, I try and explain DJ and production topics in as little time as possible without missing anything that's super important. And maybe it'll be in one take, who knows? It's been a while, I'm out of practice, so maybe not, but maybe. Don't get your hopes up. And today we're going to talk about Midi, as you probably saw in the title, and I am going to try and get as much done in one page of script as I can. So, you may have heard the term Midi in reference to notes on a piano roll in a DAW, or sometimes how DJ controllers manipulate software, or how synthesizers and keyboards talk to each other, but most people don't actually know what it is, or even if those three things are the same Midi, or if they're different, so that's what we're going to be going over. Midi stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface, and it was finalized in 1983 to help synthesizers send notes back and forth. At the time, there were ways to do this, of course, but everyone kind of had their own system, so if you had multiple types of synthesizers, especially like West Coast, East Coast thing and the additive-subtractive thing, but that's not important, it was really difficult to get them to talk to each other. So Midi standardized this process and made it possible to transmit every key press and knob twist and fader movement digitally across multiple platforms, and even to apply different features on one synth to different things on another. So Midi operates by using 16 individual channels, and it transmits 16 digital signals at once. And the most common things that it's translating are note on, note off, so when you press a button and when you let go of the button, and this sends a number, essentially, encoded digitally, corresponding to a note between C-1 and G9, which is a range of 128 notes, which is actually more notes than a piano has. A piano only has 88, so take that, real musicians. And it also often sends something called velocity, again, on a range of 128 options, which usually maps to how hard you pressed the key. It will generally also send the channel number, so if you have multiple Midi devices, they know what signals are meant for what, and the receiving end can sort of separate them out and delineate everything to where it needs to go. There can be control change messages, which change parameters like mix or cutoff, but it gets a little more complicated, and you can go way down that rabbit hole if you like. And nowadays, it's pretty common for devices to use something called USB MIDI, or MIDI over USB, same thing, obviously, which carries the same information as traditional MIDI, but it uses USB ports, so you don't have to buy adapters, you don't have to have that weird 5-pin cable that synth nerd you talked to at Guitar Center was telling you all about. Don't worry about that. You can use USB for a lot of devices. But in a standard MIDI cable, there is a 5-pin connector, and it is one directional, so most devices will have a MIDI in and a MIDI out. Just like audio cables, you can't plug it into something and send audio and receive audio through the same cable normally, asterisk, caveat, in almost every case. Now, most applications are actually only using 3 out of those 5 pins, so people tend to use microphone cables sometimes, which can work most of the time, but it's not really recommended. It's not really what they're for. They're for analog signals, and there's a bunch of other different stuff. So if you have MIDI cables and you're trying to transmit MIDI, generally just use the MIDI cable. Now, there are 4 ways, generally, that you, the kind of person that is likely to be watching my videos, will be running into Midi. And the first is USB control of a software with something like a MIDI controller. These controllers are sending MIDI-type signals down the USB cable into your computer, and then your software is determining what each of these signals means and what to change. The nice thing about this is you can usually go into the mappings and change what MIDI signal is corresponding to what, so you can kind of customize what you want to do. Even if you have a normal DJ controller, if you want, the play button on deck 2, you could map that to anything you want. You could map that to mute if you feel like it. Probably not advisable, but hey, maybe you have an eclectic performance. The second type that you may run into is keyboards and synthesizers connecting together to be able to communicate and pass notes back and forth like we discussed earlier. And this will let a producer do things like use a keybed or a keyboard that they really like the feel of, but get sounds out of a completely different machine that maybe doesn't have a keybed attached to it, or it has a key bed, but it's plasticky and they don't like the feel of it and they want to use their nice piano simulation that they spent thousands of dollars on. And this can also relate to the third type of MIDI use, which is sequencing in a DAW. You can either draw in MIDI notes into a piano roll in a DAW and play them back, or you can play on a physical keybed and have the DAW record the notes that you're pressing and playing, and then go in and tweak a little bit. So you can still have the natural performance of yourself playing a keyboard, but if you just made one mistake in the entire song and you played the whole song all the way through, you can just go and edit that one mistake and you don't have to re-record the whole thing. If you're like me and you're not going to bother to learn to play a keyboard or any real instrument if you can help it, you can literally draw whatever you want, and as long as you don't even need to understand sheet music really, but if you visualize it kind of like sheet music, you can basically just draw like sheet music what you want the keyboard to play, and then hit play and it does it for you. It's fantastic. The physical steps are becoming more and more unnecessary in music, which is fantastic for people who, I'm getting off track again, people who want to create music but don't want to learn the physical aspects of it, or people who have a disability. Maybe you only have one hand, or you don't have very good dexterity in any of your limbs, but you want to be able to create music. Well, you can do that now, and you can write pieces for piano that are entirely you. You don't have to translate them through another person playing your piece that you wrote and hoping that they express it properly. But again, it's supposed to be lightning round, and I always get distracted. The fourth use of MIDI that you're likely to run into is to synchronize video and lighting effects. And this is generally not done by most artists. This is only done by like larger artists, mostly due to the time and effort it takes to happen. But when it works, it looks incredible. A recent example is G. Jones's Path Lives tour. He is pressing buttons on stage that are making the sounds that you're hearing, but those buttons are also sending MIDI signals to the lighting and visual system to cue different things, so that his performance on stage is reflected visually and he doesn't have to stay on any particular beat in order to keep the visuals lined up. It's a fantastic innovation that helps artists deliver a more all-encompassing performance without having to lock themselves into a rigid set of exactly what's going to happen beforehand. Another diversion. But there are quite a few variations on the MIDI protocol, including Midi 2.0, which actually is like rolling out as we speak. Well, I'm speaking. I hope you're not speaking. You should be listening. Pay attention. They've been working on Midi 2.0 for like 17 years, and it can do a lot of amazing things, but this video is already too long for a lightning round video, so feel free to Google Midi 2.0, and if you have any questions specifically about MIDI or what you should name your new dog, feel free to ask, and I'll do my best.